The plane lost all control at 15,000 feet. The pilot gave up. Then a little girl did the impossible. "Flight 9821, do you copy?" The air traffic controller's voice crackled through the headset, tense, urgent. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 9821. We've lost flight control. Systems are glitching. The captain is down. Repeat. Captain Harris is unconscious," Ryan shouted, his voice shaking as he struggled to keep the aircraft level. A deafening thunderclap boomed just outside the cockpit, followed by another violent jolt as the plane dipped sharply to the left. The cockpit lit up in flashing red. "Stall, warning!" the monitor screamed. Panels flickered, lights dimmed, then surged back to life with a sickening hiss. Ryan clutched the yoke, sweat pouring down his temples, his pulse racing like a war drum in his ears. His eyes darted across the gauges, most of which were no longer responding. "Hydraulics are failing. I'm trying manual override." Behind him, Captain Harris's body slumped against the console, completely unconscious, a small streak of blood trailing from his temple where he had slammed into the metal casing during the earlier turbulence. Ryan's hands gripped tighter. This was only his third commercial flight as a co-pilot. The simulator training, the hours of checklists, it all paled in the face of this chaos. "This can't be real," he muttered, then louder, "I need direction. What's the alternate landing plan?" The radio was momentarily silent, then, "Try rerouting to secondary autopilot. If unresponsive, you must regain control manually. Do what you were trained for, son." Ryan closed his eyes for half a second, trying to force calm into his mind. But it was like holding back a tidal wave with a paper shield. The altimeter was spiraling, and they were dropping fast, 15,000 feet and falling. Down in the main cabin, chaos reigned. Passengers screamed, some prayed, others clung to loved ones or their seats. Luggage compartments had burst open, oxygen masks dangled from the overhead, swinging like haunting pendulums. In row 2F, Julia Anderson sat ramrod straight, her expression unreadable, her mind calculating. Her arm encircled her daughter, 6-year-old Emma, who sat in eerie silence, clutching a small plush airplane. Julia's blonde hair framed her face, not a strand out of place despite the storm around her. Her suit was tailored, her heels polished, but there was a quiet storm behind her sharp blue eyes. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy!" Julia didn't look at her. She was watching the cabin crew, wide-eyed and panicking. "Mommy!" Emma said again, more firmly. "I think I can help." Julia finally looked down. "Baby, stay buckled. This is going to be over soon." Emma shook her head slowly. "No, it won't. I saw the way we turned. The pilot doesn't know how to fix it, but I do." Julia's breath caught. "Emma, no, don't." But Emma was already unbuckling, slipping past the attendants who were trying to regain order. She moved swiftly for her age, weaving between legs, stepping over bags and trays, until she reached the cockpit door, ajar, left open during the commotion. Inside, Ryan was bracing against another wave of turbulence when he heard a soft voice behind him. "I've done this before. I know what to do. I can help." Ryan spun around. He blinked. Standing at the cockpit door was a tiny girl, brown curls, gray hoodie, bare feet, and the calmest pair of eyes he'd seen all day. "What? How did you get in here?" he asked, stunned. "I'm Emma," she said, stepping forward confidently. "I'm 6. I play on my mom's flight simulator. It's really good. I know where everything is." Ryan stared, half expecting a hidden camera crew to pop out and yell that this was some twisted prank, but the terror in his gut told him otherwise. The girl wasn't panicked. She wasn't joking. She was completely serious. "I know this system," she continued. "You can't recover from the stall unless you shift the aileron manually and reduce throttle. The left panel, there." She pointed to a secondary console. Ryan hesitated. "I'm not joking," Emma said. "If we don't do it now, we'll keep spinning." Ryan was about to say something, anything, when another violent tremor rocked the cockpit. He didn't have time. "All right," he said, stepping aside just enough for her to reach the controls. "Show me." Emma climbed into the captain's chair, her tiny hand surprisingly sure as she touched the panel. "Throttle to 30%. No more," she instructed. "Stabilizer trim, reset. Here. No, a little to the left." Ryan obeyed without thinking. For a terrifying moment, nothing changed. Then the descent slowed. The tilt evened out. Ryan checked the instruments. "Altitude holding? Heading stabilized. How?" "I told you," Emma said, glancing at him with a shy smile. "I've done this before, on the simulator. Over and over. Mommy made it for me." Ryan exhaled hard, adrenaline still surging through his system. He glanced toward the cockpit door, now crowded with 2 flight attendants and a stunned air marshal who had just caught sight of the unusual co-pilot. Emma ignored them all. "We need to radio the tower. Tell them we're back on manual control." Ryan grabbed the radio. "Flight 9821, we've regained partial manual control. Situation under control, assisted by a very small, very brilliant passenger." "Say again?" the controller crackled. Ryan allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Just get us a runway. She'll guide me the rest of the way." He looked over at Emma, who nodded solemnly. Back in the cabin, Julia stood frozen near the cockpit entrance, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her heart had dropped when she saw her daughter disappear. Now, watching Emma in the captain's seat, confident, poised, her fear transformed into something else entirely: wonder and awe, and the smallest, most painful pinch of guilt for never seeing this coming. Passengers stopped screaming. The plane leveled. The masks stopped swinging. A hush began to fall. In the cockpit, Ryan looked down at his tiny co-pilot. "All right, Captain Emma. Let's land this bird." Emma giggled softly. "Okay, let's fly." Ryan had expected panic, hesitation, anything but the quiet confidence of the little girl now seated in the captain's chair. Emma didn't fidget or flinch. Her small hands moved with purpose as she focused on the panels before her. She began guiding him through the steps calmly, as if she'd rehearsed them 100 times before. Her instructions were clear and steady. "Adjust this, lower that." Ryan followed her lead without question. Little by little, the aircraft responded. The wild descent slowed. The plane began to steady. In that cramped cockpit, with alarms still flashing and the storm pressing on the windows, something remarkable was unfolding. A 6-year-old girl, too small for her feet to reach the floor, was helping an overwhelmed young pilot regain control of a plane in crisis. When Ryan asked how she knew what to do, Emma simply explained. Her mother had built a flight simulator at home, part toy, part training tool. Emma had practiced countless times. What seemed like a game had actually taught her how to think under pressure. Behind them, crew members and passengers watched in disbelief through the cockpit door. In the main cabin, the chaos had quieted. The worst seemed to have passed. Back in her seat, Julia sat frozen. On the small overhead screen, she saw her daughter, not crying, not confused, but calmly helping to guide a commercial airplane. Julia's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from something deeper. She had always believed her daughter was special, but this? Emma was doing what no adult had managed to do. As Emma gave more instructions, Ryan adjusted the controls exactly as she asked. The plane was still damaged, but it was flying straight now. Not perfect, but no longer falling. Ryan looked at her in awe. She was focused, steady. Her confidence wasn't pride, it was preparation. He contacted the control tower to request an emergency landing strip, mentioning he had help in the cockpit. When the voice on the radio asked who was assisting, Ryan answered honestly, a 6-year-old girl. It didn't matter how unusual it sounded. The truth was undeniable. And Emma? She just kept working. From her seat, Julia remembered all the nights Emma had played with that simulator, the questions, the practice runs. Julia had seen it as a distraction, an intellectual game for a brilliant little girl. She hadn't realized it was preparation for something real. Ryan, now fully trusting Emma, followed her last few suggestions as they descended. With her help, They rerouted safely and aimed for the emergency airfield. The clouds began to break, revealing the land below. The plane was still in danger, but it was under control. Emma glanced up at Ryan and gave him a quiet nod. He smiled at her, no longer as a child, but as his co-pilot. In that moment, high above the earth, something more powerful than fear filled the cockpit. Trust. In the cabin, Julia placed a hand to her chest. In her, a tear escaped down her cheek. Her little girl was flying a plane, and the man beside her wasn't taking over. He was letting her lead. It wasn't fear she felt anymore. It was pride, and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The clouds parted just enough to reveal the narrow strip of concrete below, a military airstrip, empty and waiting, carved like a lifeline in the middle of green and gray. Flight 9821, cleared for emergency landing, the tower confirmed. Wind steady, ground crews on standby. Ryan steadied the yoke, breathing hard. Copy that. Beside him, Emma stared straight ahead, calm and focused. Flaps full, she said softly. Throttle down slowly. Gear confirmed. Ryan followed each command with precision. They moved in sync, an unlikely pair, a 27-year-old co-pilot and a 6-year-old girl. But somehow it worked. The aircraft began its final descent. Tremors still shook the frame, but the spin was gone. The storm had passed. What remained now was gravity, steel, and trust. Left correction 2 degrees, Emma instructed. We're drifting, Ryan adjusted. The runway loomed larger. In the cabin, passengers gripped armrests. Some prayed. Others sat frozen, silent. Julia stood near the cockpit entrance, unable to breathe. Her eyes were locked on the small overhead screen showing her daughter, tiny hands hovering over the controls. The wheels hit the ground with a jolt, a bounce, a skid. Then, stability. The plane rolled down the strip, slowing steadily. Silence. Then cheers erupted, applause, cries, laughter. The cabin burst into life. Ryan exhaled sharply, his hands shaking. Emma turned to him. We did it, he smiled. You did it! The intercom clicked. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan's voice rang out. This is First Officer Ryan Miller. We've made an emergency landing, and it wasn't just me. A 6-year-old girl saved this plane. More applause. Some passengers wept openly. Others clapped with renewed vigor. The cockpit door opened. Julia rushed in, dropping to her knees in front of Emma, wrapping her in trembling arms. I'm okay, Mommy, Emma whispered. Julia pulled back, scanning her daughter's face. Then she turned to Ryan. Their eyes met. She didn't speak at first, but then, quietly, she said, Thank you. Ryan shook his head. No, she's the one who saved us all. Outside, emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. Passengers disembarked, shaken but safe. News cameras snapped, phones recorded. Someone pointed toward the cockpit. That girl, a man said. She was flying. That little girl saved us. The murmurs grew louder. Disbelief turned into astonishment. Ryan stood back as Julia held Emma's hand. They walked toward the exit slowly, Emma waving once at him. He raised 2 fingers in salute, a quiet smile on his face. History had just been made. The airstrip had settled into a quiet hum. Emergency lights still flashed in the distance, and paramedics stood near the plane, but the chaos had faded into calm. The passengers were safe. The press had been kept at bay. For now. Ryan stepped down from the aircraft, moving past the cameras, ignoring the flashes. He had only one purpose. He needed to see her again. He spotted them near the terminal entrance. Julia stood tall in a crisp, cream-colored blazer, her blonde hair pulled back, her face composed like stone. Beside her, Emma sat on a bench, swinging from a bottle of water, legs swinging, still in her gray hoodie and sparkly bracelet, her plush airplane clutched in one hand. Excuse me, Ryan said gently, approaching. Julia turned. Her eyes narrowed not in recognition but in evaluation, protective. controlled, the look of someone who had built walls too high to be scaled easily. "You're the co-pilot," she said coolly. "Yes," Ryan nodded. "Ryan Miller." There was a pause. Tension hung in the space between them. Julia folded her arms. "Are you here to give another statement?" He shook his head. "No. I just wanted to say something to your daughter, and to you." She didn't move, but her posture stiffened. "She's tired. I won't keep her long." Julia glanced at Emma, who had already looked up and was smiling. "Ryan," she called, hopping off the bench and hurrying over. She flung her arms around him without hesitation. He bent down to hug her back. "I knew you'd come," she said into his shoulder. He smiled. "I told you we'd fly again." When they separated, Emma stepped back beside her mother. Julia's expression was unreadable, but she didn't pull Emma away. Ryan turned to her. "I'm not here to take credit for anything. I just wanted you to know. I didn't save that plane. Your daughter did." Julia blinked. "She told me what to do," he continued. "I was just her hands. I followed her lead. That calm she had, that certainty, I've never seen it before, not in any adult I've flown with." Julia studied him for a long time, her eyes flickering with something unspoken. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her gaze shifted toward Emma, who was now inspecting a patch of grass near the walkway. "No cameras?" Julia asked. He shook his head. "Not my thing." "And you don't want credit?" Ryan smiled, almost sadly. "It was never mine to take." Julia's lips parted slightly, her guard slipping for the first time. She looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him. "I don't know many men who would say that," she said quietly. "I'm not most men," he replied. A silence settled again, but this time it was softer, easier. Then Emma looked up, skipping back over, and without hesitation, wrapped one arm around Ryan's waist and the other around Julia's. "Can we all go get ice cream?" she asked brightly. Ryan laughed. Julia stared at her daughter, then at Ryan, and finally, she smiled. Just a little, but it was real, warm. It was the first smile she had let free in a very long time. She looked at Ryan again, really looked, and in her eyes was a quiet gratitude. Something unspoken but clear. No grand gestures, no declarations. Just a glance. And in that glance, something thawed. Something healed. Something began. Not love, not yet, but something just as powerful. Hope. Ryan did not disappear after the landing. He never asked for headlines, never chased the attention, but he did show up, quietly, consistently. The first visit came just 2 days later, with a small model airplane in hand for Emma and a shy smile for Julia. "I figured she earned her wings," he said, placing the tiny replica in Emma's palm. From that day forward, he became a regular presence. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. Sometimes he helped Julia with a leaky faucet or a jammed window. Sometimes he just sat on the porch, reading while Emma drew chalk airplanes on the pavement. Julia remained guarded at first, always composed, always one step removed. But slowly, cracks began to appear. Not in her strength, but in her distance. She started asking him about his flights, offering him tea instead of water, setting a second plate at the table without asking if he was staying. Emma, of course, adored him. He read to her in the evenings, helped her assemble complicated Lego sets, and once built a makeshift simulator from cardboard and tablet screens just to make her laugh. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Julia lingered at the kitchen island, a glass of wine in hand, her fingers nervously tracing the rim. "You know," she said suddenly, "I wasn't always this cold." Ryan looked up from the sink where he was drying the dishes. "I don't think you're cold." Julia gave a small, tired smile. "Most people do. After the divorce, after selling the company, I built walls. It was easier, safer." He nodded, not pressing her to continue. "My ex," she said quietly, "was brilliant, charming, and very good at lying. He made me feel like I was too much, too ambitious, too driven. Then he left. Emma was just 2. Ryan leaned on the counter, arms folded, waiting, not judging, just listening. I told myself love was a distraction, that building something, anything, was safer than trusting someone again. Ryan's voice was low. Sounds like you were building protection, not just success. Julia met his eyes. Maybe. And then you showed up, with your silence and your silly model planes. He smiled gently, guilty. That night, she didn't walk him to the door. She just let him stay. On another evening, Julia returned from a long meeting, her heels in one hand, exhaustion plain on her face. She dropped onto the couch without a word and closed her eyes. Ryan was already in the kitchen. He didn't say anything, just quietly finished the dishes, wiped down the counters and gathered the scattered toys off the living room floor. He found a blanket, laid it gently over Julia's sleeping form, then tiptoed into Emma's room to check on her. Emma was wide awake. "Story?" she whispered. Ryan smiled, knelt beside her bed, and picked up the dog-eared book she had left on the pillow. "Only a short chapter," he warned. Emma giggled. "Promise." Downstairs, Julia stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the soft lamplight. Her gaze landed on the tidy kitchen, the empty wine glass, rinsed and drying. Then she heard the soft hum of Ryan's voice from Emma's room. She rose quietly and padded down the hallway, stopping just outside the door. Inside, Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, the book open, his voice low and rhythmic. Emma was already asleep, her head nestled into her pillow, fingers loosely curled around the airplane plushie. He closed the book gently and stood, turning to leave. And there Julia stood, watching him. He froze. She didn't speak. She just stepped forward, slowly, and placed a hand on his arm. Her eyes shimmered, not with fear or doubt, but something deeper, gratitude, peace. Tears welled in her eyes, silent and unexpected. She looked down, embarrassed, but Ryan reached gently and brushed one away with his thumb. Still, he said nothing. He did not pull her into an embrace. He did not kiss her. He just stayed, right where she needed him to be. And in that silence, something changed, not with words or grand gestures, but with presence, a quiet, steady presence, the kind that stays. The story exploded within hours. Clips from inside the cabin circulated on every platform, passengers recounting a child in the cockpit, headlines splashed with words like miracle, child hero, and impossible. Emma's name trended worldwide within a day. Hashtags like Captain Emma and 6-year-old saves flight flooded timelines. People were amazed, moved, inspired. And then, as quickly as the admiration soared, the questions began. Wait, a child flew a plane? Is this bravery or parental negligence? Where were the adults? It shifted subtly, then sharply. Commentators questioned aviation safety. Memes mocked the airline. Anonymous profiles shouted, "She's 6. 6! What kind of mother allows that?" And child endangerment disguised as heroism. Julia read it all, every headline, every cruel comment. At first she told herself to ignore it, to be proud of Emma, to hold her tight and trust the world to understand. But it didn't stop. Within days, news vans circled their street. Julia had to pull Emma from school after classmates repeated online accusations. Paparazzi parked across from the house. Questions came from every direction. Not about the landing. About her parenting. One morning, Julia found Emma curled up on the couch, the plush airplane clutched to her chest. "Mom," she whispered, "did I do something wrong?" Julia froze. "No, baby," she said, rushing to her daughter. "No, never. You were amazing." Emma's voice trembled. "Then why are they mad at me?" Julia couldn't answer. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Julia lashed out. The storm she had been holding finally broke. "You should have stopped her," she shouted at Ryan in the kitchen, her voice tight with pain. "She's a child, Ryan. She shouldn't have been in that cockpit." Ryan stayed calm, his face pale but steady. "She asked to help," he said quietly. And she did help. She's 6. She saved lives. Julia shook her head, backing away. She's being ripped apart. They're blaming her. Me. Us. Do you even get that? I do, he said. And I'm sorry. I didn't think it would get this big. She's a little girl, Julia's voice cracked. She's my little girl. I know, he said. Emma stood at the top of the stairs, unseen, hearing every word. She crept back into her room, closed the door, and cried. The next day, Ryan disappeared from the house. Not in anger, in purpose. He called a journalist friend from aviation school. Then he walked into a live interview and faced the cameras. They expected denial, evasion, deflection. Instead, Ryan looked straight into the lens and said calmly, clearly, "She didn't pilot a plane. She didn't land it alone. She was a child who had trained herself on a simulator her mother built, who remembered what no adult could under pressure. She used her mind, her voice, and her heart to help. That's not endangerment. That's bravery." He paused. And her mother. She's not reckless. She's not absent. She's brilliant. She raised her daughter to think, to speak up, to stay calm, to believe she could help. Isn't that what we want for our children? The room fell silent. Within an hour, clips of the interview were everywhere. People began to listen. The narrative shifted again, this time in the right direction. The praise returned. Not just for Emma, but for Julia. "Thank you, Julia," trended that night. Ryan didn't call Julia. He didn't need to. She found the clip on her own, alone in her kitchen, wine untouched beside her. His words hit deeper than any apology could. She closed the laptop, stood in silence, and felt something inside her crack and soften. Emma peeked around the corner. "Mom?" Julia turned, knelt down, and hugged her tightly. "You were right," she whispered. "You did everything right." That night, Julia sat on the porch, staring into the dark until headlights rolled into the driveway. Ryan stepped out, unsure. She walked toward him slowly, stopped just short, and looked up. "You didn't have to say those things," she said. "I know," he replied, "but you meant them. Every word." She reached out, took his hand gently. This time she did not let go. The weeks that followed were quieter. The media storm, once all-consuming, slowly faded into background noise. News stories took over the headlines, political scandals, celebrity drama, a record-breaking snowstorm. The world moved on, as it always does. For Julia, Ryan, and Emma, life settled into something that resembled normal again, though the edges still shimmered with memory. Emma returned to school. Julia dove back into work. Ryan visited when he could, less frequently now, but still often enough to feel present. He brought model kits for Emma, cooked with Julia on Saturdays, and helped patch up a creaky kitchen cabinet without being asked. And then the news came. Ryan had been reassigned. A new international route, longer flights, overseas schedules, months away at a time. The kind of promotion most young pilots would be thrilled to accept. He texted Julia about it, short and simple. "Leaving in 5 days. I'll stop by before I go." She read the message twice, maybe 3 times, before placing the phone down on the kitchen counter. Her expression didn't change. Her hands didn't tremble, but something in her chest tightened. She didn't reply immediately. They sat on the porch the night before his departure. The air was crisp, the stars scattered like confetti overhead. Emma danced barefoot through the yard, chasing fireflies with a mason jar and her laughter echoing between trees. Julia sat with a blanket over her knees, watching her daughter run free under the glow of the porch light. Ryan sat beside her, arms resting on his knees, eyes quietly tracking the same small girl. "When are you coming back?" Julia asked after a long stretch of silence. Ryan exhaled. "I don't know. Maybe in a few months." She nodded slowly, twisting the edge of her sweater between her fingers until her knuckles turned white. But when she looked at him, it wasn't sadness that showed. It was something steadier, a deep steadiness that came from surviving too many goodbyes. "Don't forget," she said, her voice low but clear. There's someone here who will always be waiting." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence held more than enough meaning. The next morning, as the sun broke over the trees, Ryan knelt to hug Emma goodbye. She pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "It's for the plane," she said earnestly, "so you don't forget us." He opened it later, on the tarmac, alone in the quiet before takeoff. Inside was a drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands, one in a pilot's hat, one in a tiara, one with yellow hair and a laptop. The caption in wobbly letters read, "Captain, Princess, Mom." He folded it carefully and tucked it into his flight jacket, over his heart. 2 months passed. Emma didn't talk about Ryan every day, but whenever she did, it was with soft certainty, like mentioning a favorite star she knew was still shining, even when clouds hid the sky. Julia said little. But some nights, she left the porch light on a bit longer, and when she did, she'd catch herself glancing at the end of the street, listening for footsteps she would not admit to missing. Then, one Saturday afternoon, as the trees rustled in a gentle breeze and the house lay quiet, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, just steady. Julia opened it. There he stood, wind-blown and travel-worn, eyes tired but full of something unmistakable. He didn't speak, he just smiled. She blinked once, surprised, then smiled back, soft and slow. Behind her, a squeal rang out. "Ryan!" Emma launched herself into his arms before he could even step inside. He caught her with ease, laughing, lifting her as she wrapped herself around him like she never wanted to let go. Julia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Her voice was calm, but her eyes shimmered. "You're late," she said, still holding Emma. He shrugged with a grin. "Turbulence," she chuckled, stepping aside to let him in. "Welcome home." Months passed quietly but surely, like the soft ticking of a clock in a house that had finally found peace. Ryan had made the decision without grand speeches or ceremony. He simply asked to transfer to a city route. No more long-haul flights, no more weeks away. He rented a house just 2 blocks from Julia's and unpacked like a man who had no plans of ever leaving again. He picked up Emma from school twice a week. They had a routine: aviation trivia on the ride home, grilled cheese sandwiches on Wednesdays, and a new paper plane design every Sunday. He cooked with Julia, often badly but always enthusiastically, and learned to love the way her laughter filled the kitchen. They didn't label what they were, not yet, but they were becoming something unmistakable, something whole. One morning, Emma burst through the front door holding a paper from her backpack. "Look, Mommy," she said, waving it. "My parent-teacher conference invitation." Julia took the form. Her eyes scanned down to the bottom line. Parent/guardian Ryan Miller. She paused. Emma watched her closely. "Is that okay?" Julia smiled softly and kissed the top of her head. "It's perfect." She didn't change it. Over time, she let herself be different around him. Softer, quieter, vulnerable in the ways she used to fear. She even reached for his hand at the grocery store once, without hesitation, and didn't pull away when people noticed. Ryan never pressured. He never asked for more than she was ready to give. But she gave it anyway, bit by bit, heart by heart. On a golden Sunday afternoon, the 3 of them set out for the park. The air was warm, the sky stretched wide and blue, and Emma ran ahead with her newest creation, a plane made from bright white cardstock, its wings perfectly creased. Julia sat on a picnic blanket, her head resting against Ryan's shoulder, her fingers laced with his. They watched Emma dance across the grass, her laughter cutting through the air like music. "She's getting better with those planes," Ryan murmured. "She's yours as much as mine," Julia said, her voice quiet. Ryan turned to her, surprised. She met his gaze without flinching. Then Emma turned, cupped her hands around her mouth, and shouted, "Let's fly again, Captain!" Ryan stood slowly, reached down and helped Julia to her feet. He looked into her eyes, his voice low. Next time, let's fly to somewhere special. Just us. Our honeymoon? Julia blinked, her breath catching. Then she nodded, her smile spreading slowly, lighting her whole face. Yes, she whispered. Emma raced toward them, wrapping her arms around their waists in a tight, happy squeeze. Her airplane caught a gust of wind and soared high, spinning through the amber sky. They stood there together, wrapped in each other, the sun dipping low behind them. And as the camera panned away, a simple line appeared across the screen. Sometimes, the safest landing is into someone's heart. Thank you for joining us for this unforgettable journey of courage, healing, and the kind of love that changes lives. If this story touched your heart, made you tear up, or reminded you that family can be found in the most unexpected places, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We bring you powerful, emotional tales that warm your heart and stir your soul. Leave a comment below. What part of Emma's story moved you the most? Like, share, and send this to someone who believes in miracles made by love and kindness. And be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that might just change your day or your life. Until next time, keep believing, keep loving, and remember, sometimes the safest landing is into someone's heart. See you in the next story.